Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today centers on a tiny, intensely critical window in human development. We're talking about the complementary feeding period, which, usually kicks off around 6 months of age. For you, the listener, who is constantly seeking to optimize health and development, this is absolutely pivotal. It's not just about introducing solid foods. It's about shaping the body's entire infrastructure, starting with the gut and the immune system.
That's the crucial context we have to establish. I mean, this phase, around 5 to 6 months, it represents a collision of major developmental events. You've got infants receiving external food sources for the very first time, and their gut microbial community, the microbiota, is undergoing this rapid and massive colonization process.
Right, so it's a total paradigm shift for their little bodies.
Exactly. And current global recommendations are really clear on this. They encourage a wide, diverse range of complementary foods, especially plant-based ones, alongside continued breastfeeding. And the whole point is specifically to support this critical immune maturation.
And when we say this period is critical, we mean that any disruptions or even just missed opportunities here, they can have profound, long-lasting consequences, correct? What's the risk if this colonization goes wrong?
The risk is substantial, and it's why researchers call it a window of vulnerability. Aberrant, or let's say suboptimal microbial colonization in that first year of life creates a whole cascade of issues. It's linked to increased gut permeability, what some people call leaky gut, and low-grade systemic inflammation, and a failure of the immune system to learn tolerance.
Wow, so it's not a small thing.
Not at all. These disturbances significantly increase the lifetime risk for non-communicable diseases. We're talking allergic diseases, asthma, type 1 diabetes, obesity. We are increasingly recognizing that the foundation for adult health is laid down in those first 12 months.
So if the diet is the main lever we can pull during this critical window, how do we use it strategically? Our deep dive sources focus on a very specific, targeted intervention: daily consumption of blueberries. Why this fruit? I mean, blueberries are delicious, obviously, but what makes them a candidate for actively shaping this immune gut axis?
Well, this is where we move beyond basic nutrition and into the realm of bioactive compounds. Blueberries are nutritional powerhouses. They contain essential vitamins, decent amounts of dietary fiber, and a really high concentration of specific polyphenols, primarily anthocyanins.
Anthocyanins.
Yes, they are in fact one of the richest dietary sources of anthocyanins available, these specific colored pigments. That's where the magic lies.
So anthocyanins, let's call them the active ingredient. Do they act like a traditional vitamin, or is their mechanism a bit more nuanced?
Oh, it's far more sophisticated. In the context of the gut, these anthocyanins function as powerful prebiotics. And a prebiotic isn't just generic fiber, It's a compound that's selectively used by host microorganisms, and in doing so, it confers a health benefit. So when the microbiota breaks down the anthocyanins, they produce these very specific metabolites that actively signal to our own host cells.
So the hypothesized benefit isn't just the blueberry itself, but it's what happens after. It's the metabolites produced when the good bacteria eat the blueberry's components.
Precisely. The core theory guiding this research is that blueberries, through these bioactive compounds and their resulting metabolites, can beneficially shape the gut environment. They can help maintain microbial homeostasis, a stable, healthy balance, and actively modulate that communication highway researchers call the microbiota inflammation immunity axis.
So we're looking for a dietary nudge that shifts the whole system away from inflammation and more toward immune tolerance.
That's the goal.
That sets up our mission perfectly. We are diving into a high-quality source, a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. I mean, the gold standard of clinical research. Tell us a bit about the design and the participants.
This was a really rigorous clinical trial conducted in the Denver metro area, and it focused on exclusively breastfed U.S. infants. They were followed intensively from 5 months of age, right when complementary feeding usually begins, all the way through their first birthday at 12 months.
Those 7 crucial months.
Exactly. The goal was to track changes longitudinally across that entire window.
And the intervention itself was a powder, which, as the critique noted, sounds a bit clinical. It's not like just grabbing a handful of fresh fruit.
That's true, but using a controlled powder is what ensures the standardization of the dose and, crucially, the blinding. The infants received up to 10 grams per day of a freeze-dried, high-bush blueberry powder, which was mixed into a puree or a liquid. The control group got an isocaloric, visually identical placebo powder.
And the 10 grams of powder, what does that translate to in real-world terms?
That's the critical part. 10 grams of that freeze-dried powder is biologically equivalent to about 2 ounces of fresh blueberries, or 5 standard infant fruit servings.
5 servings a day. That's a huge amount for a baby.
It's a highly meaningful level of exposure for an infant diet, yes.
So the researcher's central question really boils down to 3 linked outcomes then. Did this daily consumption impact what the caregivers were reporting in terms of allergy symptoms? Did it change specific immune biomarkers, like the 29 cytokines and chemokines they measured? And most fundamentally, were those effects driven by shifts in the gut microbiota, which they analyzed using 16S sequencing?
That is the complete picture. The value of the study is its integrated approach. It links what the parents see, the clinical observation, to the underlying physiology, so the immune system's status, and then ties it all back to the key environmental modulator, which is the bacterial community. It's a perfect example of trying to map that whole communication axis between diet, bugs, and health outcomes.
All right, diving into part 1, here's where it gets really interesting. We need to go beyond just the general health buzz around berries and really understand the specific biological punch that these anthocyanins deliver. We heard they modulate the immune system and protect the gut barrier. How do they actually do both of those things?
The mechanism of anthocyanins is surprisingly sophisticated. When we look at the immune side of things, they act like powerful signaling regulators. They've shown the capacity to directly interrupt or modulate the immune signaling pathways that are highly relevant to allergy prevention.
Okay, help us simplify the jargon here. You mentioned Th2-skewed cytokine responses. For the listener, what is the Th2 pathway? And why is skewing it a bad thing?
Right. So think of your immune system like a military, and it has different branches. The Th1 branch, that one typically handles things like viruses and bacteria. The Th2 branch is the arm that is fundamentally responsible for allergic and asthmatic responses.
Oh, the allergy branch.
Exactly. When the immune system is Th2 skewed, it means that branch is hyperactive. It's overreacting to harmless things like pollen or food proteins. And markers like interleukin-4, IL-4, IL-5, and especially interleukin-13, IL-13, are the chemical signals, the cytokines that the Th2 branch uses to drive all that inflammation and allergy.
And the anthocyanins actively suppress these pro-allergy signals.
Exactly. They actively downregulate those Th2-skewed cytokine responses. But they don't just put the brakes on inflammation, they also hit the accelerator on tolerance. They simultaneously upregulate the activity of regulatory T cells, or TREGs.
The TREGs, those are the immune system's peacekeepers, right? The ones that tell everyone to calm down.
They are the absolute essential component of immune tolerance. TREGs are the specialized cells that tell the immune system to stand down, to not attack harmless antigens like those found in food or the environment. By promoting TREG function and expansion, anthocyanins directly support the dampening of allergic inflammation. We actually see in experimental models that the polyphenols inhibit Th2 differentiation by downregulating key genetic switches like GATA3 expression, which helps block signaling pathways like NF-kappa B and STAT6.
So they are fundamentally reprogramming the immune response at the cellular level. They're telling to choose tolerance instead of reaction.
That's the core hypothesis. And then we also have to consider the physical barrier. Anthocyanin-enriched extracts have been shown to attenuate gut barrier dysfunction caused by common pathogens like Escherichia coli, at least in experimental settings.
So if the gut is like a castle wall, what happens if that wall becomes leaky?
Well, if the wall is leaky, antigens, foreign substances, and microbial toxins can cross that barrier and trigger systemic inflammation throughout the body. This is a crucial early step in allergic sensitization. Anthocyanins appear to offer protective effects, helping to reinforce the tight junctions between the gut lining cells. So they're basically maintaining the wall's integrity.
Okay, so a two-pronged attack. Reinforce the barrier and reprogram the internal immune signaling.
That's it.
That makes a very strong case for the intervention. Now let's switch to the trial structure itself. The critique noted that the researchers were very careful about how they balanced the groups. They blocked randomization by infant sex and mode of delivery. Why was that so crucial?
This is a critical technical detail. We know that both sex and particularly mode of delivery, so vaginal versus C-section, profoundly affect an infant's initial gut microbial colonization. A baby born vaginally is typically seeded with the mother's beneficial gut and vaginal microbes, while a baby born via C-section often acquires microbes from the hospital environment or skin. If the groups weren't balanced for these factors, any microbial changes they saw could just be an artifact of the delivery mode, not the blueberry powder.
Got it. So they made sure that the blueberry group and the placebo group were equally bug disadvantaged or bug advantaged right from the start.
Exactly. And the baseline characteristics for the 61 infants who completed the study, 30 in the blueberry group and 31 in the placebo, were generally very comparable. Age, C-section rates, which were around 24%, medication use, and high vaccination rates, all very similar.
However, you flagged a key imbalance that actually makes the result even more compelling. What was that initial difference?
Right. At enrollment, so this is right before the intervention started, the blueberry group was significantly disadvantaged clinically. More infants in the blueberry group had a history of allergy-related symptoms, specifically respiratory symptoms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. For example, 7 participants in the blueberry group reported respiratory issues like a dry cough or wheezing, compared to 0 in the placebo group. A greater number of infants in the blueberry group also had a history of skin symptoms.
That is powerful context. If the intervention group starts out with symptoms and the control group is symptom-free, the blueberry group has a much steeper hill to climb just to look equivalent, let alone show it's better.
It raises the bar dramatically.
Yeah.
Any subsequent finding of symptom resolution in the blueberry group, in particular, has to be taken very seriously because they started from a less favorable baseline.
Let's talk about diet and growth. Were the babies getting the same amount of food and growing similarly?
Yes. The researchers made sure that aside from the intervention powder, the overall consumption of complementary foods was comparable. There were no significant differences in energy, macronutrients, or fiber intake from complementary foods between the groups at any measured time point. This really suggests that the blueberry powder wasn't causing parents to reduce other food intake, which helps isolate the effect of the bioactives.
And their growth. What OZ, LAZ, and HCAZ. We should probably find those for our listener.
Good point. These are standard anthropometric measurements used to assess physical development against population norms. What EZ is weight for age Z-score, LAZ is length for age Z-score, and HCAZ is head circumference Z-score. They basically tell us if the baby is growing normally, and the study found no significant differences in these scores between the groups, which confirms the intervention was safe. It didn't mess with typical growth.
Okay, finally, let's address the low compliance, the elephant in the room that the critique highlighted. It's tough to get a baby to eat the same specific powder every day for 7 months. The data showed only 36.8% of the blueberry group had full compliance at 12 months versus 61.1% in the placebo group. That's a huge disparity.
It is a significant challenge in pediatric nutrition trials. Compliance was objectively lower in the intervention group. The authors suggest this might be due to the taste of the blueberry powder, which, while flavored, probably has a distinct, mildly astringent taste from the high polyphenol content. The placebo might have been more neutral.
So as the critical learner, if only a third of the intervention group took the full dose, how confident can we be in the results? Doesn't this mean the study was effectively underpowered to test the full dose hypothesis?
That's a very fair and critical question. The authors countered this concern by arguing 2 things. First, even with low compliance, the blueberry group still consumed, on average, at least 1 infant sieving of fruit per day, so they had meaningful exposure. Second, and this is key, if significant positive results are observed despite low compliance and a disadvantaged baseline, the true effect size of the intervention might actually be much larger than what the statistics captured.
Oh, I see.
It means the bioactives are potent, even in submaximal doses. The results, therefore, become compelling evidence of efficacy, not failure.
Okay, let's unpack the clinical results, which feel almost counterintuitive given that baseline disadvantage the blueberry group faced. We know they started with more allergy symptoms. So what did 7 months of intervention actually achieve?
This was the main clinical highlight of the study. The longitudinal analysis showed statistically significant differences in the trajectory of allergy symptoms between the 2 groups over time. They didn't just compare the endpoints, they looked at how the symptom profile changed.
And where did they see the strongest signal?
The signal was strongest and most compelling in respiratory symptoms. P equals 0.02, and then also significantly in the overall aggregated allergic symptoms, P equals 0.05, which combined respiratory and skin symptoms. This suggests the anti-inflammatory effect was particularly noticeable in the airways.
So let's focus on that trajectory. If the blueberry group started with more symptoms, how did they manage to pull ahead?
They exhibited a significantly greater resolution rate by the end of the study. For respiratory symptoms, 4 participants, so about 14%, in the blueberry group experienced complete resolution of those symptoms.
Okay.
Contrast that with the placebo group, where 0 participants experienced resolution of respiratory symptoms.
0, wow.
That difference, 4 resolved versus 0 resolved, is a powerful clinical indicator.
0 resolution in the placebo group for respiratory issues is a stark finding, especially when you remember that infants often naturally outgrow minor symptoms. This suggests the blueberry intervention wasn't just riding a wave of natural maturation, it was actively helping clear those symptoms.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about clearing existing symptoms. The blueberry group also seemed to be better protected against new symptoms developing. New respiratory symptoms emerged in only 7% of the blueberry group, compared to 13% of the placebo group. So we're talking about both a therapeutic effect resolution and a prophylactic effect prevention.
That dual action is key. What about skin symptoms? Things like rashes, hives, or eczema.
Skin symptoms weren't overall statistically significant in the longitudinal analysis. The p-value was 0.53. However, the underlying pattern still favored the intervention. When researchers looked specifically at rash or hives, resolution was notably higher in the blueberry group, 18% resolved, versus the placebo group, where a mere 3% resolved.
That's still a huge difference, even if the overall eczema category sort of diluted the significance.
Right. Eczema resolution rates were comparable in both groups, around 20%, which is typical. Many infants have transient eczema. But the overall picture, especially that definitive trajectory difference in respiratory symptoms and the aggregated score, strongly supports the idea that blueberry consumption altered the clinical course of early allergic manifestations.
So what does this all mean for the listener? If these preliminary findings hold up, what's the so what of using simple food as an immune strategy?
Well, the takeaway is that we have a compelling clinical proof of concept for immunonutrition. It supports the hypothesis that very early, targeted dietary exposures to highly bioactive foods like blueberries can tangibly influence immune outcomes and significantly attenuate or even resolve allergic manifestations in early life. This is powerful because it suggests a simple, scalable, food-based strategy, not a drug that could eventually inform primary prevention guidelines. It shifts the whole discussion from just basic nutrient adequacy to harnessing the medicinal potential of whole foods during this critical developmental window.
Now we get technical in part 3. If the clinical symptoms improve, the proof has to be in the physiology, right? We need to see evidence of a shift in the body's internal immune blueprint. The researchers measured 29 cytokines and chemokines, but the action really centered on 2 main actors, IL-13 and IL-10.
Right, we're looking directly at the balance sheet of the immune system. Inflammation versus tolerance. We already introduced them, but let's just reemphasize their roles. Interleukin-13, IL-13, is the chemical signature of inflammation.
Okay, give us an analogy. If IL-10 is the peace treaty, what's IL-13?
IL-13 is the specific chemical signal that drives inflammation in the tissues most relevant to allergy, so primarily the lungs and the skin. It promotes mucus production, smooth muscle constriction in the airways, and it's a key driver in asthma development. If you see high, persistent IL-13, you have an immune system that is stuck in reaction mode. It is the core pro-allergic marker.
And interleukin-10, IL-10, is our target for tolerance.
Correct. IL-10 is the most powerful anti-inflammatory regulatory cytokine. It suppresses overactivation, tells mast cells not to degranulate, and ensures the immune system learns how to be tolerant to harmless substances. We want to see this marker go up. That indicates a strengthening of the peacekeepers.
So, did the blueberry intervention manage to successfully push these chemical markers in the desired direction?
It did remarkably well. While most of the 29 markers were unchanged, IL-13 levels showed a statistically significant difference between groups, with a p-value of 0.035. This difference represented a significant reduction in the blueberry group compared to the placebo group. Lowering that primary pro-allergic inflammatory driver is exactly the goal.
That is a direct physiological confirmation of the clinical symptom resolution we saw, especially in the respiratory tract. Now for the tolerance marker, IL-10, did we see that peace treaty being signed?
IL-10 showed a very strong trend toward significance. The p-value was 0.052. This represented a positive trend, specifically an increase in IL-10 levels in the blueberry group. So you have the ideal double action, reducing the inflammatory trigger, IL-13, and nudging up the anti-inflammatory regulator, IL-10. This aligns perfectly with the known mechanisms of action for polyphenols.
Let's talk critical thinking, though. We have the clinical improvement and we have the immune shift. But the critique highlighted that the two didn't correlate statistically across the whole group. Why the disconnect? I mean, if the blueberries help the baby, shouldn't the change in their IL-13 levels predict their symptom resolution?
This is where we need to be careful with interpretation. The fact that we saw the clinical effect and the physiological shift in the desired direction suggests the intervention worked. The lack of a direct statistical correlation across the entire cohort, the p-value for IL-10 was 0.22, for IL-13 it was 0.99. That points to limitations in measuring those variables.
What are those limitations?
First, sample size. Cytokine analyses are inherently noisy, and with a modest sample size of 61 completers, it's easy to lack the statistical power needed to link two very different data types, a plasma measure and a self-reported symptom, with confidence. Second, measurement variability. We're measuring systemic, circulating plasma levels of cytokines, which are often poor proxies for what's happening locally in the lung or the gut lining.
Ah, I see.
The biological effect might be highly concentrated at the gut mucosal surface, where it's changing the local immune environment, but that effect gets diluted and masked when we measure it in peripheral blood plasma.
So we know the intervention worked, but we couldn't statistically prove how it worked across everyone, potentially because of the noise in the data.
Exactly. However, the researchers took a smart approach and broke the data down by clinical outcome, and that's where a critical pattern emerged.
Tell us about that pattern, specifically in the symptoms resolved group.
Right. For those participants whose allergy symptoms resolved during the study period, the clinical success stories, that subgroup showed the largest median increase in IL-10. The difference was a median of 1.38 units higher than those whose symptoms persisted or developed.
So the peace treaty was most strongly signed in the babies who actually got better.
That's the interpretation. While the overall statistics were muddy, this subgroup analysis provides strong evidence that symptom resolution is physiologically accompanied by an upregulation of the anti-inflammatory regulator IL-10. It's a compelling piece of mechanistic evidence, even if it requires cautious interpretation.
And what was the consistent pattern for IL-13?
It was a reliable indicator of ongoing struggle. IL-13 levels consistently declined in children who were generally healthy or whose symptoms resolved. Conversely, IL-13 levels remained relatively unchanged in those with persistent or newly developed symptoms. This reinforces the role of IL-13 as a robust marker for ongoing allergic inflammation.
Moving on to part 4, the gut microbiome. If the symptoms cleared and the immune signal shifted, we have to assume the environment that started the whole conversation, the bacterial community, showed corresponding favorable changes. The blueberry compounds acted as prebiotics. So, did this diet successfully push the microbial composition toward a healthier, more diverse profile?
To answer that, we first have to acknowledge the natural progression. As we mentioned, gut microbiota alpha diversity, which is the measure of the richness and evenness of bacterial species, naturally increases over time in all infants as they consume solids and their gut matures. The study confirmed this, showing a highly significant effective time in both groups.
So the gut is maturing anyway. Did the blueberries give it an extra boost? Did they accelerate or enhance that maturation?
They certainly showed a strong signal of doing so. While both groups saw an increase in diversity, the blueberry group tended to have a visibly greater increase in alpha diversity compared to the placebo group. The formal statistical test, the group-by-age interaction, trended toward significance. The p-value was 0.085 for Shannon diversity and 0.087 for richness.
Okay, so not quite statistically significant, but very close.
Right. In an exploratory trial, a strong trend this close to the significance threshold is definitely an encouraging biological signal, and it's consistent with previous adult studies linking polyphenol intake into increased gut biodiversity.
A diverse, rich gut community is generally considered resilient and healthy. Now, let's identify the specific winners and losers in this bacterial community that responded directly to the blueberry input.
We identified several groups that increased significantly in relative abundance in the blueberry group compared to the placebo. These are the potential winners that benefited from the anthocyanin degradation.
Okay, give us the list of winners and explain their functional roles. Why should the listener care that these specific bugs increased?
The key winners were Vaccinacea, Flavonifractor, Subdula granulum, and Butyriisococcus. Let's start with Vaccinacea. This genus is a significant player because it metabolizes lactate. During fermentation, a lot of gut bacteria produce lactic acid. If that lactate accumulates, it can lower the pH and cause issues.
So they're like the cleanup crew.
Basically, yeah. They prevent lactate accumulation, which helps maintain overall microbial balance. And some studies have suggested it plays a protective role in childhood asthma development, making its increase here particularly relevant. Then you have Flavonofractor. The name kind of gives it away. This microbe is crucial because it has potent anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, and it gets them by degrading flavonoids like the anthocyanins in the blueberry powder.
So it's unlocking the power of the fruit.
It is. Its increase confirms that the blueberry bioactives were being successfully metabolized. It's helping to unleash the anti-inflammatory power of the fruit. Then there's subdelagranulum. Researchers are watching this one closely. Research is limited, but studies suggest higher levels of subdelagranulum may be protective against the development of food allergy in infants. And finally, Butyricicoccus, which is often associated with beneficial short-chain fatty acid production, which reinforces the gut barrier.
So the blueberries are specifically feeding bacteria that are either highly protective, excellent waste managers, or specialists in unlocking the anti-inflammatory potential of the fruit itself.
That's the perfect synthesis. The shift is functional, not just numerical.
Okay, now what about the potential bad guys? Which taxa decreased in the blueberry group, suggesting the intervention suppressed them.
The intervention was associated with a decrease in the relative abundance of several potentially problematic taxa. That list included Actinomyces, Escherichia, Streptococcus, and Rhambutia.
Let's focus on Actinomyces and Escherichia. Why are their decreases so noteworthy in the context of allergy prevention?
Well, Escherichia is a well-known potential pathogen, so reducing it is highly desirable. We know from previous research that higher levels of the Escherichia genus in infants are often reported alongside clinical markers of allergy, like eczema, and they correlate positively with total serum IgE, a common marker of allergic sensitization.
So less of that is definitely a good thing.
A very good thing. It suggests a shift away from a potentially dysbiotic, unhealthy, inflammatory environment. And then Actinomyces, while it's generally commensal, meaning it lives harmlessly in the gut, has also been implicated in later allergic disease. Prior studies have found Actinomyces in greater abundance in infants who are later diagnosed with allergic diseases. Its suppression suggests the gut environment is becoming less favorable for microbes linked to allergic pathology.
And out of all these specific shifts, was there one that showed the strongest statistical trend?
Yes. The reduction in Actinomyces was the most statistically compelling. It showed the strongest trend after adjusting for the false discovery rate, or FDR.
We should clarify FDR. Why is that important?
The false discovery rate is critical when you're testing hundreds or thousands of different bacteria simultaneously, like they did here. By chance alone, some results will look significant. FDR adjustment is a statistical control that ensures the significant results you're reporting are truly reflecting a biological difference, not just random chance. The fact that the reduction in Actinomyces still trended close to significance, with an adjusted p-value of 0.056 after this stringent correction, confirms the biological robustness of that finding.
The collective evidence from Part 4 is that the blueberry intervention promotes functional, beneficial bacteria while simultaneously suppressing or making the environment less hospitable for potentially allergenic or pathogenic microbes.
Exactly. It's a beneficial shift across the whole microbial community spectrum, driven by the specific compounds in the fruit.
Part 5 is where we complete the map. We've seen the clinical shift, the immune shift, and the microbial shift. What's fascinating here is building the tangible links between the two. How did the researchers confirm which bacteria were talking to the critical immune signals, IL-10 and IL-13?
This is the synthesis step. They used advanced linear regression modeling and volcano plots to explore thousands of potential microbiota cytokine associations. This required really rigorous adjustment for confounders, things that could throw off the results like sequencing batch variations and, crucially, the infant's mode of delivery. This ensures we're discussing true biological communication, not just statistical noise.
Let's start with IL-10, the peace treaty, the anti-inflammatory regulator. Which bacteria were linked to high levels of tolerance?
We found several positive associations with IL-10. This means higher levels of these bacteria were statistically linked to higher IL-10 in the infant's plasma at 12 months. The winners included Lactobacillus, Clostridiaceae, and Megasphaera.
Okay, Lactobacillus we think of as universally good, and Clostridiaceae often includes those key SCFA producers we mentioned. This association really reinforces the idea that these beneficial fermentative microbes are supporting the body's primary regulatory systems.
Absolutely. The presence of these fermenters is fundamentally linked to a mature, anti-inflammatory, tolerant environment. They are likely producing compounds that directly stimulate IL-10 production by the immune cells lining the gut.
Now, here's the complexity we flagged in the critique. Why were some bacteria negatively associated with IL-10? Why would lower levels of some microbes correlate with the highest levels of immune tolerance?
This often reflects the dynamic nature of colonization and maturation. High IL-10 was linked to lower levels of Blautia, Lactobacillus, and Peptostreptococcus. A negative correlation doesn't mean these bacteria are inherently bad, but it might mean that as the gut matures and the immune system settles into tolerance indicated by rising IL-10, the relative niche for these specific taxa changes or shrinks. The gut ecosystem is constantly rebalancing.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move to the other side of the ledger. IL-13, the pro-allergy marker. Which bacteria were fueling high levels of allergic inflammation?
The primary positive association with high IL-13 was the genus Citrobacter, along with some Clostridia.
Citrobacter. That's a potentially opportunistic genus. Its positive association with the allergy marker seems highly significant.
It is a critical finding. Citrobacter species are often opportunistic. They're known to produce lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, and potentially trigger immune responses. This association provides mechanistic reinforcement for the concept that certain opportunistic genera may promote that Th2-skewed pro-allergic immune response in the infant gut. When these microbes thrive, the allergy signals spike.
Conversely, which bacteria might be the heroes, actively protecting the infant against pro-allergic inflammation, which were negatively correlated with IL-13?
High IL-13 levels were statistically linked to lower levels of Blautia, Lactobacillus, Anorostipes, and Peptostreptococcus. This is the most insightful list because it directly links functional benefit to inflammation reduction.
And tell us why Anorostipes and Blautia are such important negative correlations.
This is a classic example of the gut immune axis at work. Anorostipes and Blautia are famous in the microbial world as primary producers of butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. Butyrate isn't just fuel for colon cells. It is a powerful signaling molecule that strengthens the gut barrier and, most importantly, acts as a potent anti-inflammatory agent.
Right.
So seeing a strong negative correlation where the pro-allergy marker IL-13 is low when the SCFA producers, Anorostipes and Blautia, are high is almost a textbook confirmation of the mechanism. The bacteria that create the compounds known to promote anti-inflammatory and barrier protective effects are thriving in an immune environment that is settling toward tolerance.
It sounds like the entire system, microbes, metabolites, and immune cells, is maturing together toward a state of peace, and the blueberry intervention helped expedite that process.
That is the core conclusion. The overall trend, where many bacteria showed predominantly negative correlations with inflammatory cytokines at 12 months, strongly reflects a maturation of immune tolerance mechanisms. The blueberry intervention seems to have provided the raw material, the anthocyanins and fiber, that drove these beneficial structural and functional shifts in the microbial community, which in turn helped quiet the allergic immune signals.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. This deep dive into the blueberry intervention showed a simple, food-based strategy linked to profound, measurable changes across three interconnected systems. Can you summarize the key takeaways for us?
In short, we learned three things. First, daily blueberry consumption during the critical complementary feeding period was feasible, though, compliance challenges exist.
Right. Second, the clinical impact was measurable.
Yes. Despite starting with a baseline disadvantage, the blueberry group showed a favorable and statistically significant trajectory toward resolving allergy-related symptoms, especially respiratory issues. This suggests a powerful clinical benefit.
And third, the physiological shift confirmed the mechanism.
Correct. We saw evidence of tolerance being favored, a significant reduction in the pro-allergic cytokine IL-13, and a compelling trend toward an increase in the anti-inflammatory regulator IL-10. And these immune shifts were accompanied by favorable microbial changes, including an increase in functional anti-inflammatory bacteria like Flavonofractor, and a reduction in potentially allergenic genera like Escherichia and Actinomyces.
As critical learners, we always have to balance the enthusiasm with the caveats. What are the major limitations we have to acknowledge about this exploratory trial?
The limitations are crucial context. We noted the modest sample size. This lack of power is likely why the strong clinical effects failed to correlate statistically with the cytokine changes across the whole group. We also dealt with low compliance in the blueberry group. Only about a third took the full dose consistently. This suggests future trials should perhaps use smaller, more feasible doses or different delivery mechanisms.
And the nature of the product itself, it was a powder.
That's a key point. They used a highly standardized freeze-dried powder. This may not perfectly reflect the effects of eating whole, fresh fruit, which has more complex physical structures and varying degrees of bioactives. Future studies need to bridge that gap and test fresh or frozen blueberries.
And finally, the temporal limitation. The study ended at 12 months.
Exactly. We have no idea about the persistence of these beneficial immune and microbial shifts long term. Do these changes revert if the child stops eating blueberries? We need longitudinal follow-up into toddlerhood and beyond to see if this early intervention translates into reduced rates of asthma or other allergic diseases at ages 3 or 5. And we have to treat the microbiota-cytokine correlations as exploratory. They need validation in larger trials.
That sets the stage for the path forward. Future research needs to get even more targeted.
Absolutely. The next step is to use this proof of concept to identify the specific bioactive compounds responsible. Is it mainly the anthocyanins, the soluble fiber, or maybe a synergistic combination of both? Researchers can try interventions using isolated polyphenol fractions versus the whole fruit fiber matrix to tease out that mechanism. This will allow for highly targeted, evidence-based dietary recommendations.
Ultimately, this study contributes valuable information that could radically influence future dietary recommendations. We're moving toward guidance that looks at complementary feeding not just as a nutrient requirement checklist, but as an opportunity for active, almost pharmacological-like modulation of the immune system.
It's the future of pediatrics, embracing immunonutrition as a preventative tool.
Before we close, I want to return to the complexity we uncovered in Part 5. It forces us to ask a difficult but important question about microbial community engineering. We saw that certain beneficial taxa, like Lactobacillus and Clostridiaceae, were positively associated with the anti-inflammatory marker IL-10. This is the simple feed the good bug strategy.
Yes, the promotion strategy.
But then, we also saw powerful anti-inflammatory SCFA producers like Blautia and Anerostipes were negatively associated with the pro-allergic marker IL-13. This is the suppression strategy, quieting the overall inflammatory environment so the bad guys can't thrive.
It demonstrates that diet works through multiple layered mechanisms.
So this raises a profound final question for you, the listener, to consider long after this deep dive is over. When designing dietary prevention strategies, are the most beneficial effects driven by actively promoting and maximizing a few key good guys that produce tolerance signals? Or is the primary mechanism about suppressing the environment, thereby minimizing the influence of potential opportunistic bad guys that fuel inflammation?
It's the essential question in microbial ecology. Do you weed the garden or do you nourish the flowers? The blueberry study suggests a powerful interplay of both, and understanding that differential impact will be the focus of the next decade of dietary research.
A truly fascinating complexity to end on. Thank you for sharing your sources with us for this deep dive into blueberries, infant immunity, and the profound power of simple dietary choices.
Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied. Keep thinking critically about how simple additions can shape long-term health.
We'll catch you on the next dive.